When we think about the idea of the traditional ghost story, certain key tropes come to mind. A grand old house standing in isolation, a dusty corridor leading to a mysteriously locked door, a shadowy figure appearing at a window. Many of these ideas date back to the Victorian era and the golden age of the ghost story, with writers such as M.R. James. But one of my favourite examples of the genre was written in 1983 with a masterfully built atmosphere and a powerful sense of inner psychological experience. The author draws on some of the key tropes of this golden age of the ghost story, but fashions it into something new and terrifying. With an intriguing central mystery and a horrifying gut-punch ending, The Woman in Black by Susan Hill is the perfect ghost story. When I was about 16 or 17 years old, my auntie took me to see The Woman in Black as a theatre production in London's West End. And I remember seeing a poster that proclaimed it as the most terrifying experience in theatre history or something like that. And I remember scoffing at that and thinking, how bad could it be? But it got me, and it got me bad. And there was one moment in that production in particular, one image, one idea that really shook me to the core, and I lost sleep, and I can still bring that moment to mind. It was years later that I actually decided to read the book, and it got me all over again. That feeling of being blindsided just as you think you know what the truth is, and of being completely shocked out of my skin, and the way that the story used tension, I relived it all over again. But this time it dawned on me that it was all the more powerful on the page. And when it comes to fear, it's what's in your mind's eye and it's what's in your imagination that is most powerful, even more powerful than anything on stage or screen. The story starts at Christmas, like lots of good ghost stories do, and there's a family all sitting around sharing their own scary stories and trying to outdo each other with increasingly lurid and violent tales. Our narrator, Arthur Kipps, is challenged to see whether he has a ghost story. You must know at least one ghost story, stepfather. Everyone knows one. Ah, yes. Yes, indeed. All the time I'd been listening to their ghoulish, lurid inventions and their howling and groans, the one thought that had been in my mind, and the only thing I could have said was, no, you have none of you any idea. This is all nonsense, fantasy. It is not like this. Nothing so blood-curdling and becreeped and crude, not so laughable. The truth is quite other, and altogether more terrible. Come on, stepfather, don't be an old spoil sport. Do your stuff, stepfather, surely you're not going to let us down. I stood up, unable to bear it any longer. I'm sorry to disappoint you, I said, but I have no story to tell, and went quickly from the room and from the house. Of course, Arthur Kipps does have a story to tell and decides to put it all down onto paper in the hope of exorcising it from his memory. This story that he writes down is essentially the story of The Woman in Black that we read. And so this framing device, the idea of a story within a story, is another Victorian ghost story convention. And I like it in this case because it sets up the main narrative, but it also lends it a strange kind of credibility. That whole atmosphere of, oh, you think you've got a ghost story, well, here's a real one. I like that. And so the main body of the narrative consists of Arthur's experiences many years ago in a town called Crythin Gifford and a place called Eel Marsh House. And hats off to Susan Hill for those place names. Crythin Gifford and Eel Marsh House are exactly as warm and welcoming as they sound. Arthur Kipps is sent from his London law firm to go to Eel Marsh House to work through the abandoned papers of the late Alice Drablow to bring her affairs to a conclusion. So it's a mundane task in an isolated place. But story-wise, Arthur goes on the same journey as many a classic ghost story protagonist, from rational, clear-thinking, educated man of the city to traumatized, broken witness to horrifying, inexplicable events. The lead characters in these stories time and again arrive in an isolated place, think they understand everything, think the locals are strange, think the material world is all there is, and then they experience these horrifying events and have their worldview completely upended. Why is this kind of story satisfying? Is it because we like to see people who think they know it all brought down a peg or two? Remember that the ghost story really found its stride in the Victorian era. Is there something appealing about the idea that even in the age of scientific rationalism and discovery, there are still older, shadowy forces at play in our world? Ghost stories permeate almost every culture in the world, and they often play on that tension between the urban and cosmopolitan on the one hand, and the rural and more remote on the other. On this side, scholarly knowledge, and on this side, ancient wisdom. Even though tropes like this are well worn, The Woman in Black does such a good job of immersing us in the sights and sounds and inner experience of the lead character that we can't help but be swept up by it all. There are shadowy figures, bumps in the night, there's even a dog that barks at an unseen threat. All the cliches are present and correct, but it's all executed so beautifully with such a controlled pace that it still feels fresh and, more importantly, chilling. So imagine yourself in an isolated grand house in the middle of the night, and you hear an unfamiliar sound, and you go to investigate. At my feet, the dog Spider began to whine, a thin, pitiful, frightened moan, and to back away from the door a little and press against my legs. My throat felt constricted and dry, and I had begun to shiver. There was something in that room, and I could not get to it, nor would I dare to if I were able. I told myself it was a rat or a trapped bird, fallen down the chimney into the hearth and unable to get out again. But the sound was not that of some small, panic-stricken creature. Bump bump. Pause. Bump bump. Pause. Bump bump. Bump bump. It's literally a thing going bump in the night, but I promise you, it's scary. In many ghost stories, the haunting functions in a similar way to the murder in a crime story. It's the central mystery that tantalizes the reader. Who is the woman in black? There are ghost stories that choose to leave these revelations ambiguous, but one of the things I do like about The Woman in Black is you do get answers. Everything does add up. A ghost is usually seeking something, some kind of impossible closure. They're often stuck in time, doomed to repeat and relive certain events. And so, while a haunting can often be thought of as simply malevolent or angry in its nature, The Woman in Black is more than that. It has a more textured emotional scope, a tragic, melancholic vibe. I'd even say there is a way to interpret her story as a kind of social commentary on class and gender in Victorian society. But I won't say anything more than that. The final 10 pages or so of The Woman in Black accelerate to a resounding finale. All of that carefully ratcheted tension is released, with a densely packed series of revelations and events. Even with just a couple of pages to go, you think you understand the depth of the horror, and then it cranks it up another level. When the penny finally drops, and you realize exactly how The Woman in Black connects to Arthur Kipps, and why he was so reluctant to tell the story to his stepchildren at Christmas, it hits home in spectacular style. The final line of the story lands with a resounding abruptness as Arthur Kipps tries to close the door on the whole story and exorcise the woman in black from his life forever. They asked for my story. I have told it. Enough. You've been watching The Portly Raven, where we devour great books and then crow about it. Please do like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support the creation of more books-related content just like this.